So as you might have heard, there's an election about to happen in this country. I know, disgusting. But what we need to talk about with that is the role that 6 people in particular play in determining how the election plays out. And actually not just in this election, but in all federal elections. See, I'm talking about the 6 members of the Federal Election Commission, or the FEC. That's the agency that's responsible for administering and enforcing federal campaign finance law, with its stated mission being to protect the integrity of the federal campaign finance process. And while there have been concerns for a long time now that the FEC has been failing that mission, there are now increasing concerns that it's actively working against that mission. And that, thanks to a Democratic commissioner who's now siding with the GOP to lift all sorts of limits on political spending. Also, a thing that you need to know with the FEC is that it's 6 commissioners. They're nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Also, at least 4 commissioners have to agree to take any substantive action, and no more than 3 commissioners can be affiliated with the same political party. So with our 2-party system, that means 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And believe it or not, for a long time, that actually worked. Right, for the first few decades of the FEC, which was established in 1975, it generally succeeded in its mission through consensus and compromise, improving election integrity by doing things like imposing restrictions on contributions and expenditures, establishing public financing for presidential campaigns, and coming up with detailed regulations on the personal use of campaign funds. But for the past 15 years or so at least, the agency has consistently been divided along party lines, struggling to deal with investigations, enforce existing guidelines, and update rules to keep up with technology. In fact, a 2021 study analyzed 5,000 votes on the FEC since 1990 and found that partisan conflict has come to characterize commission voting patterns, with deadlocks on commission actions skyrocketing in recent years. Also, noting that the partisan divide poses real problems for the agency in meeting its mandate to enforce the law and offer regulatory guidance. And so with that, it's generally been the FEC's Democrats seeking more robust enforcement of election laws and greater transparency, with the Republicans standing in the way. And so according to advocacy organizations like Campaign Legal Center, the result has been that the FEC is failing to enforce the law against both Democratic and Republican special interests. So ultimately, the real loser isn't just any one party, it's the American people. With the CLC running at the FEC's inability to do its job has allowed wealthy special interests to flood our elections with vast amounts of dark money, in turn making it more difficult for everyday Americans to have their voices heard, because you get candidates and elected officials instead favoring policies that prioritize their donors. And I mean, to that point, the 2020 election saw more than $1 billion in dark money spending at the federal level, actually boosting Democrats more than Republicans for the first time. But more notably, that overall number is just so big compared to prior years. I mean, in 2006, for example, spending by organizations that didn't disclose their donors was estimated at less than $5.2 million. And also a key thing to note there is that this goes beyond just the FEC. With the Supreme Court's controversial 2010 decision in favor of the conservative nonprofit group Citizens United, it made it so that corporations and other outside groups could spend unlimited funds on elections, with that ultimately resulting in the creation of so-called super PACs, with that notably all coming from a case actually brought against the FEC for one of the rare cases in which enough of the commissioners agreed to take action. But still, with that said, what's happening now is perhaps just as significant, with Adav Nodi, the CLC's executive director of the Campaign Legal Center, telling The Times, "We are in a new era. It is breathtaking the speed in which the rules are being torn down. There has been more activity in the last 2 years to allow money into the system than in the 20 years before that combined." And the so-called new era, it began in 2022, because that's when the Senate confirmed Democrat Dara Lindenbaum to the commission, a Democrat who has now repeatedly crossed the aisle to vote with her Republican colleagues, helping make changes that have been described as some of the most significant regulatory revisions since the McCain-Feingold campaign finance law that was put into place 2 decades ago. And with that, one of the biggest decisions has been to open the door for super PACs to work together with campaigns to plan and execute costly door-to-door canvassing operations. Whereas before, politicians had been forbidden from coordinating strategy with super PACs to limit the influence of mega donors. Because one of the big key things to note here is that super PACs can raise unlimited amounts of money. And with that, this decision hasn't totally lifted that prohibition, but it still means that politicians and super PACs are working more closely than ever. And actually, to that point, it was weeks after that decision that the Trump campaign started making plans to sit down with groups like that to talk about working together and planning for the election. And it wasn't long after that the commission issued another decision, with them allowing federal candidates for the first time to raise unlimited money for state-level ballot measures. And that is immensely notable right now because you have issues like abortion rights ending up on ballots in the fall. Right? Florida has a measure on the ballot already, an abortion rights group in Arizona reportedly has enough signatures to put a referendum on the ballot there as well. Though also with that, something to keep in mind is that this could actually benefit the Democrats. Right? Because if the Biden administration can now raise money for abortion rights ballot measures, he can add to an already existing fundraising advantage that he has over Trump. And notably, both of those decisions, along with many others, were settled with a 4-2 vote, with Lindenbaum being the decider. Right? Something that had a lot of people puzzled, especially if you knew her background, right? Because her political background is decidedly progressive. She marched with the left-wing anti-war group Code Pink. She later served as a top lawyer for Stacey Abrams, the progressive former candidate for Georgia governor. And in fact, Sean Cooksey, the Republican chairman of the FEC, told the New York Times, "I doubt that there is a single mainstream policy issue that we agree on, that both he and Lindenbaum agree that the current campaign finance system is burdensome and overly complicated and often unfair. Now, Lindenbaum, for her part, she has downplayed both her role and the impact of the decisions, telling the Times, hey, I'm just following the law, and saying what the law says and what some people might wish the law says are different. But critics like Craig Holman, a lobbyist for consumer advocacy group Public Citizen, he's accused Lindenbaum of turning the FEC from dysfunctional to functionally avoiding enforcement. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a Rhode Island Democrat who's very outspoken on the issue of dark money, he's called it inexplicable and stunning, telling the Times what he had originally hoped were tactical compromises, it now looks more just like surrender, and adding, who would have thought deadlock and dysfunction would be the good old days? But notably, with that, we've also seen other Democrats saying this is a good thing, right? There's a real divide between those who oppose the influence of money in politics and people who are ready to accept it because they know that it might help them win. Mark Elias, for example, is a high-profile Democratic lawyer who's probably best known for his efforts to protect voting rights, but he's actually also been one of the people pushing the FEC to let the money flow more freely, including by pushing for the measures that we've been talking about. And this, interestingly, while some other Republicans have actually lobbied against some of these looser rules, even warning against making sweeping changes in an election year. So at the end of the day, it's not just a pure black and white situation, it's not neatly divided between left and right, and things have only gotten more complicated thanks to the introduction of stuff like AI. I mean, in May, we saw the Democratic chair of the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, announcing plans to consider a rule requiring the political advertisers to include on-air or written disclosures when they use AI-generated content, which notably is something that the FEC talked about tackling almost a year ago, but they haven't finalized any rules yet. But nonetheless, FEC Chairman Sean Cooksey accused the agency of overstepping its authority, writing in a letter that the proposal, it undermines the FEC's role as the top enforcer of federal campaign law, and saying that this could, quote, sow chaos among political campaigns for the upcoming election. Though the FCC chairwoman, for her part, she said in a statement that the FCC has required campaign ads to disclose sponsors for decades, and that adapting these rules to the arrival of new technologies, that's not anything new. And adding, the time to act on public disclosure of AI use is now, saying there are benefits to this technology, but we also know that it has the potential to mislead the public and misinform voters with made-up voices and images that impersonate people without their permission. And so with that, while some senators have brought forward legislation requiring AI-generated political ads to feature disclaimers, those proposals are now seemingly dead in the water. And this one agency that just needs 4 people to agree to at least get some sort of guidelines for the book, even if they wouldn't be a law, they can't do that. And this, of course, all while making it even easier for the rich and well-connected to influence our elections. Even if it's hard to say what political party will ultimately benefit more, the one thing that is truly clear is that it's leaving out the rest of us.